7 years after the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, as the year draws to an end, here's the abridged version of Libya. Let's see. Fewer migrants crossing the Mediterranean, fewer terror attacks, same political standoff, with rival governments and militias disputing each other's legitimacy. Now, to get a sense of where it's going and whether international mediation is on the right track, France 24's team went to Libya. We're going to see excerpts from the reporting they brought back and ask our panel about Europe's role when Italy's far-right interior minister goes on patrol with the Libyan Coast Guard. It's a reminder that many voters here see Libya solely through the prism of the migrant crisis. We'll see how the stakes run much deeper for players on both sides of the Mediterranean. Today in the France 24 debate, we're going inside Libya, and joining us, legal scholar and human rights lawyer Céline Bardet. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks
as well to Libya researcher Jalel Harshawi, who teaches at the University of Paris at Versailles. Yes. Thanks for joining us. And France 24's James Andre, part of that team, just back from Tripoli, 7 years on. You found authorities in the capital still stuck on how to disarm and to integrate those militias.
This is Libya's new interior minister, Fathi Bashagha. He was one of Misrata's most powerful warlords during the revolution. According to multiple sources, he has influence over the militias. And that's precisely the key to the new security deal, enrolling the militias into the state security apparatus.
Of course, there is a parallel state that runs alongside our administration. All Libyans, armed or unarmed, want security, but that's not going to happen as long as there are guns on the streets. It's clear that these weapons belong to the state, to the army. They are in the hands of citizens who have formed brigades, armed groups, and even militias. These arms must return to state control. We must give people incentive to give them back through an exchange plan, guns for money. Then we must enforce the law.
Money has become a problem in oil-rich Libya. Tripoli residents queue for hours in order to collect a limited sum of cash. 7 years of chaos have given militias plenty of time to infiltrate Libyan institutions, including banks. Today, they run a lucrative scheme, playing the black market. So what's the problem here?
Come on, you know what the problem is. A lack of cash.
No problem. It's become risky to discuss problems with journalists in Tripoli. For several months now, the country has been facing a serious cash shortage. Years of chaos have spawned a powerful black market that pumps liquidities out of the banks and pours them into militias. As a result, there's no money at ATMs, prices have skyrocketed, and tempers are flaring. For how long have you not received money?
3 to 4 months. 4 months, actually.
How do you get by?
We use checks. We buy what we need with checks. If you need to buy food, stationery for school, well, you pay with a check.
So, is that a problem?
It is a problem, because the shopkeeper charges 25, 30, sometimes 35% extra when you pay with a check. We're not begging, we just want our salaries.
I just wanted 500 dinars to get by. Just 500 dinars. I started crying inside the bank, and the clerk told me to go cry somewhere else.
500 dinars, roughly 300 euros. After a few minutes, the police arrive and try to intimidate these bank customers.
Why aren't they giving us our money?
Okay, calm down. We are slowly making the situation better. The world wasn't created in one day. It's going to be okay, but you must help us.
Another policeman, in plain clothes, steps into the conversation.
You should just thank God. There is money, there is security, everything is okay. Look, the police is here. Everything is fine. You need to make a good impression, and inshallah, things will be better.
It's crazy. Do they enjoy seeing us here, like this, in this situation? Seriously, we're tired. Sick and tired. The shopkeepers don't want to give credit anymore. I owe the grocer next door a fortune. I can't take it anymore.
Yeah, the police tried to intimidate them. That didn't work, obviously.
Well, no, it does seem that these women were very, very eager to speak. But the fact of the matter is, working in Libya is a nightmare. Because, for starters, you have to plan very much in advance. You have to write in to the FMD, the Foreign Media Desk, to ask authorization to actually film and to come into the country, because you will only get a visa once they pretty much know what you want. Then they give you a minder. The minder is with you at all times. Just this bank sequence, we actually filmed. We've been trying to film this because you have queues in front of banks all over Tripoli, all day long. Some people actually come at 4 a.m. to try and get a bit of cash. So that's how bad the situation is. We asked 100 times, can we stop and film this? Can we stop and film this? Can we stop and film this? They all said, no, you do not have authorization, because they give you a letter every morning in which they say, right, you're allowed to film such and such a thing. And you say, yeah, but we're right next to this, and this is interesting. And they say, nah, you don't have authorization for that. So what happened there was that we actually went out with the police filming. And since we were there, well, we started filming the bank sequence, eventually kind of, losing the police along the way. And then they caught us, which is what you see there. And since the cameras are rolling, they try to intimidate the people into saying what they want.
And tell us...
This is how complicated it is. We wanted to see the militias. It was impossible. We wanted to go to Tarhuna, which is the neighborhood which was fighting with Tripoli just in August. That was impossible as well. We were in contact with them. They were okay, but the authorities weren't. So, you don't work freely. It's important to note that.
Okay, so you mentioned those militias there. The Interior Minister, we saw at the beginning of that sequence, he's not just anybody, by the way.
No, he's not.
Tell us about him.
Well, Fatih Bashaga has been named very, very recently. It's about, it had been 2 weeks when we were there. So, and that was what, a couple of weeks ago. So he's been in power for a very short time. But the fact of the matter is, yes, he was one of, the leaders of the uprising in Misrata. Now, Misrata has a very special status because it was one of the cities that suffered the most during the uprising. It's the one where Gaddafi, exerted the maximum force to try and get it back. So it's true that the militias in Misrata are very powerful, but Misrata is still kind of independent in a sense today. I mean, we went to Misrata because you probably remember there was this migrant ship, but we'll talk about that later. We arrived with an authorization to film from Tripoli because we'd pressured them into actually giving us one. We got there and the authorities there said, well, yeah, okay, Tripoli said yes, we're not saying yes. And they are kind of middle of the line, if you will. But this man here, indeed, was the head of a very, very powerful militia. He is known to the leaders of the militias in Tripoli and has sway. He can influence them. This is why he's been chosen. He's also, obviously, rather powerful businessman.
Jalal Hashari, what is your reaction looking at that sequence that we saw, the bank sequence there?
Well, the monetary crisis has been going on for a while. There's been, because of external pressure from the United States and other states, there's been some kind of an improvement.
Because, you hear the police at one point saying, well, don't complain, it's getting better.
And he was not lying at that moment. So there's a slow progress. And in general, in Libya, I don't want to be sounding optimistic too much, but there is a general trend towards improvement. And a lot of the political rivals are trying to fight each other to grab all the credit for whatever improvement is being delivered slowly. So even Fatih Bashaga, for example, has sway with some players, but he's not certain to succeed because you have more of a set of truly Tripoli-related militias native to the capital who are also trying to reject whatever he's trying to impose and do it their own way. So there's still a lot of rivalry. And it's not as simple as 2 or 3 years ago where you had the Islamists versus the seculars. Now it's more of just a bunch of more cynical, opportunistic, also very smart players trying to get to the finish line and get all the visibility associated with it.
All right, the definition, or one of the definitions of a functioning state, is that the authorities have the monopoly on power, which is obviously not the case.
Not at all.
In Libya. Is that just always going to be from now on, Libya?
As I said, there's been slow improvement. Now, are we going to end up with a modern nation state like Denmark? I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime.
Sitting Bade, your thoughts on what you saw in that?
Yeah, well, it's not very optimistic, I think. But one thing I find interesting, I mean, for once also, is that we see people, Libyan, because let's not forget also that all this situation in Libya, and you know, externally we talk about migrant crisis, we saw the slavery auction, etc. I mean, the first victims of all this are Libyans. And me, I'm very attached to that because I'm working with Libyan, and I feel always bad, you know, the way we look at the country. Then what?
Yeah, because when the world's attention turned to Gaddafi, the outside world perception was everyone lives under a tent, but actually 90% of the people live in cities and have had a high standard of quite a high standard of living.
Well, they had actually. I can tell you one thing. The first time I arrived in Libya, I was in 2011, before Gaddafi was killed, and I was leading a team assessing security and justice for the EU in Libya, and I was really I didn't know much about Libya, and I was very surprised by that, to be honest. Like, people are very educated, and also in the ministries, and they had visions. So the image that we have is completely, you know, biased. The other thing is that when we see the Minister of Interior, you know, at the time, each time I had meetings with the Minister of Interior, he always had like, I don't know, 4 or 5 mobile phones, and it was keeping ringing all the time. And you talk with him and everything is ringing. He doesn't pick up nothing. And then at a point, one is ringing and he's picking up. And then after 2 or 3 times like that, I asked my assistant, but why is that? And he said, this is the militia, or this is his tribe calling. You see, and this is what Libya is exactly.
So it's ingrained.
Yeah, and so when we talk about rule of law, or not a question of rule of law, but the way we see a government, I mean, it's so complicated, you know, in Libya. It's very complicated. So
what we're seeing today with all these different militias that James was describing, even within the capital, that's part of Gaddafi's legacy as well?
In terms of the mentality, in terms of the culture, the distrust, the absence of a state. The state didn't collapse. It didn't really exist to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you have a lot of that. And a lot of what we're seeing is just a consequence of the 42 years of Gaddafi.
Which brings us to what's going on right now, because there's those 2 rival governments, the one in the east with Marshal General Haftar, and the one that's UN recognized in the capital. The talk is right now, it's not quite about elections, but instead of a national dialogue, what they call an al-Mu'tamar el-Jamai. What's the strategy right now for that UN mediator, Ghassan Salamé?
Well, he said yes to Paris when Paris was talking about elections on the 10th of December of 2018. And the whole thing was postponed because obviously it was not realistic to begin with. But Ghassan Salamé remained faithful to that French idea of going into early elections as quickly as possible. So now the game plan is to organize this national conference in January or February, sort out the last few issues in terms of organizing the elections, decide what it is. Is it going to be presidential or general, in other words, presidential and parliamentary, and do it by the end of the spring. So it's quite ambitious, and it's still about the elections. And there's still the thinking of Macron in May is still there.
Are they talking about elections, or are they talking more about this national conference when you were over there?
Well, you know, the national conference is basically just a prequel to the election. The whole point is the election. The idea with the national conference is to try and, in a sense, convince all the players that if they actually lose their election, they're going to have to step down. But the fact of the matter is, as you were saying, and it's very true, it is very much a tribal country. And you see that the allegiances don't really lie with whoever is president. It's actually quite interesting because we met Ghassan Salamé when we were there, and he said, yes, of course, you know, the media, for example, always talk about Sarraj versus Haftar. But he says, actually, these are just 2 big names. what's really happening is at a stage which is underneath, and that is all the rival militias, all the rival groups, all the rival, even ethnic groups. I mean, if you go to the south, you'll find the Tubus. It's nearly at a family level. I mean, if you take the map of Tripoli, which we have, of the militia control, well, to give you an example, something as important as the airport. There's only one airport running right now in Tripoli, and that is Mitiga Airport. Mitiga Airport is controlled by a militia called Reda Special Deterrence Force, right? It is run by a man called Abdul Raouf Kara. He was a metalsmith, and he became a warlord. The man, you know, when you arrive in Tripoli, you hand your passport not to a member of the state. You hand your passport to a man who is part of Rada Special Deterrent Force, and this is basically a militia. It's a Salafist militia. Now,
and we see at least what is it, 6 different colors on this map here. Explain that to us.
Well, basically, you know, if you want to keep it simple, you've got 4 big ones, and they've actually presented a declaration today, an 11-point declaration, in which they say that they have decided to collaborate and they have decided to back the government of national accord, that is to say, the internationally backed government of Fayez al-Sarraj. Now, what they have simply done is kind of bought themselves a little bit of legitimacy, and indeed, you know, renewed the fact that they say they are with the government. But once again, these people are very concentrated on the fact of keeping control of whatever they control and to carry on, you know, to make sure the money still flows in their direction. And they obviously want a stake in what's going to happen afterwards. But you have 4 main militias, and then you've got smaller ones that are still there, simply because they're tribal-based, because they'll be based in one neighborhood, and they will control that neighborhood. And you can't really move them out, because indeed the population will be with them because it's the same tribe group, you name it. But the state of Tripoli gives you an idea. If you zoom out, I mean, you can ask anybody. Nobody really knows who controls the south of the country if you talk about the actual country.
So, Serine Bardet, how do you establish rules that everyone can agree upon? You're not going to take away the guns by the sound of this. So at least how do you establish rules where everybody can find a common ground?
Well, honestly, if I had the answer, I would go for it. No, I don't know, but I think what was said is also, you know, one of the problem I think was the big mistake of the international community and the EU not understanding also how Libya is functioning in terms of tribes and being so fragmented. And at the beginning, since 2011, there was this...
Because there's been elections before, since 2011.
But, and exactly, and there was this willingness to build, you know, a kind of centralized state, and it was honestly completely stupid. It didn't work, and I think there is really a lack of understanding of that. Then how, you know, at the time I was also in charge of making a recommendation on how to integrate militias, and it was, to be honest, the European Union was like, okay, we're going to put millions of euros to make a program, we're going to integrate them to the police and build up police. And then when you were working on the street talking to these people who were coming from nothing, because, you know, in 2011, they decided to make the revolution. Most of them, they were just normal people, so to speak. They didn't care about, integrating the police. So you see, meaning that for me, there's been a big gap of what has been proposed at the time by the international community and the reality. And that's why I believe the fact that we go through this process of listening to people and trying to understand what they want and what they need, maybe is a good way, you know, to try to move a little bit forward for Libya.
All right, we're going to pick up on that point when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching a special edition of the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate and a special edition going inside Libya. That's where our own James Andre went, who's back with us at what is a pivotal moment. We've been talking about it in part one. The security conditions improving slightly, but still the same fragmented society and the rival governments in the East and in the West. We're also talking about it with Libya researcher Jalel Harshawi, who teaches at the University of Paris at Versailles, and international human rights attorney and legal scholar Serine Bardet. We were talking about all those competing interests inside the Libya of today. And those competing interests, well, there's another thing we haven't mentioned, which is kind of important: oil. The oil fields are divided too. Most of them are in areas under the control of Marshal Khalifa Haftar in the east. Good news for him: Libya's output has skyrocketed in the latter half of this year to its highest level in more than 5 years, reaching nearly 1.3 million barrels a day. That's from 500,000 back in June, so it's more than doubled. It's great. All this oil's going out, Jalal Harshawi. Who's getting the money? We saw certainly not those people we saw standing outside.
There's been a piece of bad news recently where a very major oil field has been blocked over the last few days because of discontent in the southwest of Libya called the Fezzan. So that's 300,000 barrels a day.
And the Prime Minister of
the
Tripoli government actually went out there this Wednesday to...
So that is a reminder that the 1.3 or 1 million or whatever is not a given. All the money has to go to Tripoli, has to go to the central bank. All the proceeds in dollars have to be concentrated in the central bank of Tripoli. That explains part of why Tripoli has been such a mess. So even if Marshal Haftar protects the extraction, helps, the money still has to go to Tripoli, and then you have all kinds of complicated arrangements back with the East. So,
but some of our viewers are going to be asking, because here we have, on the one hand, the mess we've described. It is a mess in part one of our discussion. And on the other hand, business as usual, the oil going out, and the companies are what? Italian, French, Norwegian, Spanish, etc.
Yeah, France is not deeply represented in Libya. It's more Italy, for instance. But yeah, I think it also is a reflection of the priorities from the outside, because the outside actors really matter in terms of how this crisis evolves. When all the international community really cares about a topic, whether it's migration, of oil production, or ISIS, usually matters tend to be solved because of all the pressure, all the focus. Now, is there such focus on the actual political conflict? Not so much. And that is also why it's still continuing. So there's a distinction in my mind between an issue that everybody cares about in terms of the international scene, or just one that affects the Libyans alone.
Yes, as far as the oil money indeed is concerned, it's interesting just to note that if viewers don't know Libya very well, it's only 5.5 million people, and it is the output you were describing, 1.3 million barrels a day now.
They're aiming to go to 1.6, in fact.
Yes, that was the highest they were. It was 1.6, and actually we did meet an oil company executive. I will not name him, but he was telling us, yes, well, 1.2 is pretty good, and he did confirm exactly what you were saying as to all the rest is broken, but that works. The way the money is channeled back to the various groups, etc., all that stays functional. But just to answer one of your questions, how can we fix it? Gaddafi, back then, I mean, I went a couple of times under his rule, kind of had managed to find a balance between all the forces and was basically distributing all the money, the different, business opportunities, etc., to all of the different groups and giving them a share that he saw fit. And that's how Libya kind of held together. The end game today is to manage to broker that kind of deal. And when violence broke out in Tripoli in August, it was one of the big militias south, Tarhuna, who was unhappy with the distribution of this pretty big cake, because it's not many people and a lot of oil, Libya.
I wanted to say what we don't talk about is that we talk about militia and oil and all the richness, but it's about organized crime also. There's a big business, of network, and that includes also transnational network. And I think this is also what we need to address, because
a weak
this is
state,
one of
organized crime goes wherever there's a weak state.
Yeah, because it was open doors, and that's also the situation with the migrant trafficking, but also all of this.
Well, let's talk about the migrant trafficking, precarious situation for Libyans, a dire situation for migrants. James, you went to the western port town of Subrata, that's on the road from Tripoli to the nearby Tunisian border.
Subrata's anti-migration police have just picked up these 3 men who had come to ask for help at the mosque.
And you? And you, brother? I come from where? Ethiopia. And you? You are journalist? Eritrea.
They have spent the night hiding in a nearby forest.
We're going to interrogate them. Then we'll know if they were abducted or if they fled.
The migrants say they were held for 2 years by traffickers, but managed to escape.
والله it's so dark place. مكروني بس ياكل مكروني والله. كله we died. Many people died in that place. The girl when the girl with the born she born 7 days. She born the bird 7 days. She died. The boy died.
We are there for 2 years. For 2 years, locked up. It's a hell. When you see it, it's a big place. It's a big place, and there is a lot of people in there. We suffered a lot. Do you see this guy? Yes. Starting from my hair to my neck. They broke a bottle in.
The migrants are kept inside a small cell at the back of the building. They are not free. They are effectively under arrest.
I want to go to the UN. I want to ask them. I want to tell them all the things that happened to me. And they will understand me. They will send me to the country which I want.
At this stage, no one knows what will happen to these men.
If they want to return to their home country, it's easy. But if they want to stay or return to Europe, they'll be placed in a shelter. But that's a problem, because some people have been waiting there for over 7 months. No one's interested in our brigade, not the government nor the international community. We've got very limited means. We managed to function because local residents lend us a hand. We're getting by, but for how much longer? Without more support, maybe 2 or 3 years. In the long run, the situation is sure to get out of hand again.
The anti-migration brigade is also supposed to track and arrest smugglers. An impossible task. They face well-armed gangs who are trying to retake the city. The last attack on Subrata took place on the 4th of November. 3 people were killed. We are driven around town by an intelligence officer who does not want to be filmed.
You see this building? This is where El Amu dug himself in during the battle. Look.
This is El Amu, the uncle, one of Libya's most powerful migrant smugglers. He controlled the city until he was forced out in October 2017. Since, both departures have reduced drastically. He is wanted and under UN sanctions, but for the time being he is free in neighboring Zawiya. We are taken to Major Colonel Omar Abdel-Jalil, who drove the smugglers out. He is keen to show us the city is under control.
Some cities are still held hostage by militias. It's the case around here, like in Zawiya, for instance. The attack was launched from there on the 4th of November. But one day, we will clean up all these cities, just like we have cleaned up Subrata.
Despite our repeated requests, authorities in Tripoli never granted us access to film in Zawiya. The coastline in Subrata is dotted with the makeshift jetties built by the smugglers to embark migrants. Lampedusa Island, the gate to Italy, is merely 300 kilometers north. The industrial scale of the human trafficking that took place here is still very visible. This abandoned tuna factory used to be one of the main hubs for migrants wanting to cross the Mediterranean. Thousands of them have boarded boats on this very spot on their way to Italy. Right now, local authorities control this place, and they want to believe the problem is solved. But around Subrata, there are militias headed by smugglers who try on a regular basis to attack and retake this place.
Okay, so when we watch that report, Jalal Hashawi, we see, okay, the number, as James was saying, the number of smugglers is down. That the uncle, that there was a firefight to flush him out. Is it down because they got rid of the uncle, or is it down because the European Union, the international community, is helping the Libyans to keep the migrants from crossing over?
It's all of that. Italy launched a very ambitious plan under the former government in July 2017, and that's why the battle erupted. But at the end of the day, it all worked. whatever Italy and the EU attempted actually worked out. And the flow of people reaching Sicily has come down to almost zero now. And that in itself has a lot of consequences in terms of the behavior of Italy vis-a-vis France and so on and so forth.
Because in the old days, when Silvio Berlusconi was prime minister, he was quite open about it. His method was to pay Muammar Gaddafi to keep the migrants from coming over.
Yeah, and that's essentially what the previous government in Italy tried in 2017, and it worked again. And it worked back in the day, it worked again in 2017, and that's exactly what Salvini would do today if the flow would grow again. So it's the same mentality, the same tricks.
Is it just Italy here? That's
no, it's just, no, sir, I was also thinking, because it's also very moving, you know, again, to see that. And yes, it worked out, but then what about these people? Because, you know, what happened to them and where they are? And, you know, that's the big situation, because how many detention centers you have where you have all these migrants.
Because we see at one point, one of the minders there, or the jailers, I don't know what you'd call them exactly, saying if they want to go home to their home country, it's easy.
Yeah.
I don't know. What did he say? Yeah,
no. Well, in fact, just to explain the whole setup. In fact, the anti-migrant brigade, okay, is part of a local Slavi militia. You can tell from the way they're dressed, and this is. They collaborate with local authorities, which are headed by Colonel Abdeljalil. You saw in that film. Now, it's unclear why El Armo actually left Subrata. Actually, I mean, you know. There was obviously a battle. Italian media reported back when this happened that, in fact, the Italians had paid El Armo off. And we asked Colonel Abdeljalil, and he said, well, yes, there was a, you know, we've heard of a transaction that took place at sea between the Italians and the traffickers, where they handed them a lump sum of cash and in exchange for stopping their activity. It's a very, very lucrative business. The business of smuggling migrants. For people, I mean, El Armo, for example, is very powerful.
So why has it gone down so much? Because it was, what, nearly 120,000 in 2017, and with the year almost over, according to the International Organization for Migration, it's less than 23,000.
Yeah, there has been a lot of change since, and you're right. One of the big changes is actually on a map we have here, and that is something which has changed. As you know, the ports in Italy are now closed. You see Lampedusa, that's the little blue square. This is where the migrants try to get when they leave from Zawiya, which you see on the map. Subrata is right next to Zawiya. It's only about 20 kilometers to the west of Zawiya. All the red dots are incidents involving migrant ships. In fact, the search and rescue areas have been redesigned in June 2018. You see on this map, you have the Libyan SAR area. That is search and rescue. That, before June 2018, did not exist. As in, basically, the migrants that had accidents, as you see, a lot of them have problems as they leave the coast. Well, they will have been rescued by Maltese Coast Guards, Italian Coast Guards, Tunisian Coast Guards, but not Libyan Coast Guards, because the Libyan Coast Guard did not exist, and the Libyan search and rescue area did not exist. So they're now being rescued by Libyan Coast Guards, and of course they're being brought back to the Libyan coast. Now there is a problem with that, is that indeed legally, as far as international law, obviously this is a decision by the body that's in charge of search and rescue areas, but the UN says, well, not the UN, international says that when you rescue someone at sea, you have to bring him back to a safe port. And the UN, in reports in 2018, have declared ports in Libya unsafe. So that's where you have a problem. They are being rescued by the Coast Guard, and they're being brought back to Libya, which is logical. It's Libyan Coast Guard.
So sort of a legal void, if you will.
There is
when you spoke with the UN Special Envoy, Ghassan Salami, did he mention this? Did he talk about this problem?
Well, obviously we asked him the question. What Ghassan Salami says is that obviously this is a complicated, you know, it's a complicated issue. But he says, you see, the problem is it's not the few. This was his answer. He says, you know, it's not the few hundred or thousand that tried to cross. The issue for him is all the ones who are actually coming in through the south, arriving in Libya. And, you know, the thing is, there are militias that take these people in and indeed detain them in conditions that can be incredibly hard because the objectives of these groups is basically to extort these people. So basically they will torture them, contact their families, ask the families to wire money so they stop torturing their son, their nephew, their you name it. Okay, but on the other hand, you have the Libyan detention centers themselves where, I mean, the question was asked also with Mr. Salame. He said, you know, it's a mixed bag. I mean, a lady from the UNHCR said, you know, we have these detention centers, they exist. They are, you know, officially licensed, if you will. Some of them are okay. Some of them are not. They're all running on pretty small budgets in any case. And it depends very much who is running the actual detention centers. And then one last detail. The UNHCR has been trying to open a center in Tripoli. It has actually opened apparently a week ago. I have not checked. But that was being blocked by the Libyan authorities for a very long time, simply on the grounds that, well, you know, various reasons. But the core reason was that, in a sense, that was stemming the business of taking care of these migrants.
Right.
If the UN does it,
then it takes away the business from the traffickers.
Exactly.
Jalal Harshawi, we have had conferences in Palermo, in Paris, the Italians hosting some, the French hosting some. You've got the UN mediation, the French and the Italians who are accused by critics of being a little too close to the leader in the east of the country, Marshal Haftar. If you were whispering into Emmanuel Macron's ear right now, what would you say when it comes to the way this migrant crisis is being handled and more broadly, how to take a holistic approach to everything here?
Well, first of all, his credibility on Libya has been kind of damaged because of the big announcement that the elections were going to be held and it didn't pan out. But I think the opportunity here is that Italy resembles France more and more, because the number of migrants reaching Italy has come down to zero. So now the only uneven exposure, if you will, the only big difference between the two countries, of course, Italy is still very worried, much more worried than France. France is kind of insulated.
So in front of the cameras, they're at each other's throats, but actually their policies are very aligned.
Yeah, Italy is not very aligned yet, but Italy is trying to join the French club, if you want, on Libya. And so that almost is an opportunity. I mean, it's an ugly one, but it is an opportunity nonetheless. So there's more room for agreement between France and Italy now than 6 months ago or a year ago.
And what does that mean, though, for both the Libyans and the migrants we saw in that report?
Oh, the migrants, I mean, the migrants inside Libya, I don't think anybody really cares about them in terms of the Europeans. The Europeans just care about the number of people reaching that continent. If people die in the desert, nobody cares. If there are detention centers that we don't even know about, and a lot of them are opaque, we don't even know their location, the number of people dying in them or suffering in them, the Europeans just don't seem to care. They cared when those people reached their continent. Now the situation is different. It is quite different.
Yeah, and we've had the European Union again welcoming leaders from the continent this week, including Egypt's strongman Abdel Fattah al-Sisi for a conference. One of the topics was migration. The EU has been backing the likes of Egypt and Libya in what James was showing us, the patrols of their own shore.
The great advantage is that if these countries do the rescue missions, they take people back into transit countries. If we do the rescue missions, then it will always mean a ticket to Europe. And this new trend where we see Egypt, Libya, and others carrying out rescue missions leads to people being brought back to their home countries. So less and less people will start the journey because it is not attractive anymore. Human traffickers will lose their business model. But the most important is, people are no longer drowning in the Mediterranean.
Und das Wichtigste, die Menschen nicht mehr im Mittelmeer ertrinken.
Céline Bardet, is that how you'd spin the new reality?
No, I don't know, but I found this a bit cynical. But
why do you find it cynical?
Because first of all, you say if there are lots of, you mentioned the detention center. There are lots of detention center we can call private, or I don't even know how to call that. So nobody has no idea what's going on there. First of all. Second, as you rightly said, the situation of migrants there in Libya are going through absolutely crazy things. I mean, really. And you're right, nobody cared. Nobody cares, except maybe at the moment the ICC, because, you know, I was there 3 weeks ago.
International Criminal Court.
Sorry, the International Criminal Court, who is looking at how to actually address the issue of migrants in terms of trafficking. And third, yeah, I don't know what's this. I mean, fine, maybe we are moving a bit forward, but still the situation is awful. I don't even know how many people who are being completely damaged. You heard it in your movie. 2 years. These people are being locked and raped and tortured. I mean, it's beyond unimaginable. And we are here. Like, okay, now it's getting better, maybe. Yeah. Come on, you know, we cannot say that.
That's the new Europe. I think it's great that we have a clip from Sebastian Kurz. He's saying explicitly that Egypt is the gold standard in terms of human rights.
Yeah, you're right.
So that's the decision that Europe has to make. Is it what we want? Is it what we stand for? Yeah, if that is the case, if we have to follow the far right of Austria, then yeah, that's the future of Europe.
All right,
I hope it's not. I mean, come on.
That's what he's saying, and it's very clear.
I know, yeah.
All right, that stark warning from Jalal Harshari will be the final word. I want to thank Céline Bardet as well.
Thank
James
you.
Andre, stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Nicholas Rushworth.
Hi to you, Francois. Hi, everybody. I want to talk about oil and the whole question, which is part of this equation in Libya, and go to one of the main news websites in English. It's called The Libyan Address. One of its top stories today is about Fayez al-Sarraj, and he's been down in the south of the country to an oil field called El Sharawa, and he has met protesters there. The oil field produces 315,000 barrels of oil a day, so vital for revenue for anybody in Libya to have. Shut down for a week by a mix of protesters, tribesmen, state guards demanding payments and so on. The New York Times is covering this too, there in its headline. The oil field vital. He's gone down there to discuss and try and get the protest to give in. Now, in the last hour or so, we have seen breaking news that that oil field could be reopened. But again, when you're reading the story, you hear, well, is this a militia, the Fezzan Rage movement? What exactly is it? Are there genuine accusations against the Tripoli and so on about negligence in the south of the country? So here, the National Oil Corporation of Libya is saying we can't comment whether the oil field has been reopened. But the whole question of the fragility of the country is seen in trying to actually just physically deal with these assets that Libya
we don't
has.
know if it's an industrial dispute or a political power play here.
Well, various elements are at play here, tribesmen and protesters. Now, the special mission to Libya, the UN's monitoring mission, is saying, hold on a minute, they do have genuine cause for protest there. There is a groundswell of support for the Fezzan movement. So just to continue about the whole question of migrants, here we've got the International Organization for Migrants in Libya saying they've got a hotline for returns. It's really a small numbers, but in this year, more than 4,000 going back to Nigeria, repatriated there. It's one of the headlines for Punch, the newspaper there, saying today 174 arrived by bus there. So it's a constant task, isn't it, in terms of the migration problem, and in that broader context of the UN pact signed in Marrakesh last week, which is the collateral damage, seems to, at this point, to be much more in Europe, with Charles Michel on the ropes. He is the king has not yet accepted his resignation, but the whole crisis in Belgium very much linked to measures within this Marrakesh Pact, which are non-binding. The fear among Europeans is very much that, well, it will give the status of a migrant a status of human rights within law, and then that could go into the courthouse, and so would that change the equation in terms of rights? So the issue
of what are the values is put out there, as well as the pull factor.
Yeah. So just again, that news website, the Libyan address there with this piece, a voyage ending in death. There it's saying multiple avenues out of the country, all of them extremely difficult and problematic. And as you said, the crisis very much going on.
All right. And by the way, if you want to see in full the report that James filmed on Reporters for Reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine, that's on our website, France24.com. I want to thank you, Nicholas Rushworth. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here.